What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the cart before the horse, right? Here's my premise first and foremost, and then I'll show you how I got there. Uh, Obviously, I believe that Sputnik was bullshit. I think that Sputnik was a bunch of fear mongering and that it was a tool that was utilized to bring about NASA, DARPA, and the National Security, Education Department, right? There's a lot of things that come out of it. And when you look back at Sputnik and what the story is and what we're supposed to believe, you'll see that it starts falling apart really, really fast. Okay? I'll give you an example. Sputnik, when it orbited the Earth, uh, at any given time was anywhere between like 138 miles up to like 500 and something miles up, right? Depending on where it was in the orbit. And it orbited for 22 days and it made exactly 1,440 uh, rotations around the Earth, right? And we'll get to even those numbers and whatnot. But the main point is being so it's at minimum 138 miles up in the air, but it could be up to like in excess of 500. I think it was like 580 or some shit like that. We'll go over the specs in a minute. So here's the problem with that. Okay, this is Sputnik right here. Okay, you see this? It's a 10 ball with 4 crack pipe antennas. Like you see these things? If you're a child of like the 80s and 90s like me, right? Like this is essentially looks like the fucking antenna that was on your parents' car. Remember? And then like in the 80s and 90s, like crackheads would go around and like pop them off and snap them so they could fucking freebase through the antenna, right? Those were the days. Anyways, so you see this right here? This is actually Sputnik. Now, inside of this, like 60 something percent of this mass in here is actually just the battery for Sputnik to operate, right? But this ball right here is 22 inches in diameter, okay? So not even a full 2 feet in diameter, right? Like this is bigger than Sputnik, right? I don't know if you could see my hands, okay? Now, here's the problem. When Sputnik launched and there was this crazy panic, right? And you can go to the Library of Congress and you can read about it, but we're going to go over and go through all of this. There was this crazy ass panic, right? Everybody thought it was fucking the end of the world, right? The media started putting out this like scare porn, right? Because nobody knew what the fuck was going on. Space wasn't even really a thing. As a matter of fact, it wasn't a thing. So all of a sudden, you hear, uh, you wake up in the morning and it says rush moon, over America. And people are wondering what's going on. And the story is that the Russians launched this satellite into the air and that Americans were freaking out and people said that they could see it. And if you had a ham radio, you could listen to it because it put out these pulses so you could hear it and track it as it was orbiting the Earth. So the media just like 11 times a day is putting out these crazy stories, freaking everybody out, right? The government's talking about, oh yeah, this could be a new weapon system, essentially, right? Think nukes in the sky, and they're coming for us. Be scared. So the people start like really freaking out. And then, of course, Big Daddy government comes in and they're like, well, here, we need to have NASA and we need to create DARPA and we need to create a national security educational department so that we can teach the public what we want to teach them, how. So a lot of things come out of here, right? And what it also does is it takes the average person who was very spiritual at that time, right? Like this is really kind of like pre-NASA, pre-space, pre-globe, right? So a lot of people are still heavily involved in religion one way or another, right? And religion is something that is within, right? You pray, you think of things within. What space and Sputnik did, right? And again, I'm going to get into all this. I just want to lay out the overall arching premise to you so you have an understanding of what you're in for. Uh, Sputnik caused the national attention to go from inwards of themselves of being uh, important and kind of like the center of the universe to outwards, right? Now it went from inward spiritual to like outwards, like the fucking vastness of space and, satellites. And now we're going to uh, start going down that direction. We're going to get DARPA and they're going to start creating all this fucking technology. And there's all these things that end up coming. But anyways, the thing I want to point out is that this 22-inch spear, right? 22-inch spear that everybody was saying they saw, right? People were panicking, and it's going to bomb us, right? Dude, it's 22 inches tall or round, okay? You're not going to fucking see that 138 miles up in the sky, period, or fucking 500, right? That shit just ain't going to happen. As a matter of fact, as years went on, people started recognizing that. So you'll see, like, I saw something in 2007 where, like, fucking MSNBC, we're trying to, like, walk back some of that. But interestingly enough, what you do see, and we're going to go over this too, is that the launch thruster, which is much bigger, okay, they coated it in this highly reflective um, aluminum stuff, right? So that when it was going through the sky, when it fell, that people would see that. And I'm going to show you this, right? The whole fucking thing was a psychological mind fuck, right? And then while the beep is going on, right? And everyone's big into radio at that time. Ham radio is a super big thing, right? Like people are listening to the radio. So like this is nonstop. It's almost like fucking, like the way CNN was in the early 2000s and Fox, like where it's like all day news, late breaking, blah 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 blah. They just keep throwing shit at you. That's what they were doing here because it was restructuring what the rest of this future uh was going to hold, right? All right. So this fucking little ball right here, where are we at? Oh, I'm gonna get to that. This little ball allegedly, um, oh, you could see for 30 miles, 138 miles at minimum, right? Which is just complete bullshit. Okay. The other thing, remember I told you that 60%, 60 something percent of the mass inside this little ball, right, was the components for the lithium battery that powered this while it's cycling and orbiting for 22 days with its 1,440 orbits, right? And it's a 1 watt uh, pulse, right? And a tone. Here, and I'll let you hear that because they actually have it here. And this thing right here, this is the linchpin. So at launch, this thing gets pulled out, and then the connection gets bridged, and thus Sputnik could start its beep, 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 beep as it goes on and freaks everybody out, right? Because that's the fear. That's what it was all psychological, dude. It was like, you hear a story and the story freaks you out. Nothing really happened, but fucking, somebody got to you. All right, give me a second. Yeah, artist rendition of Sputnik. Yeah, on the ground. Oh my God, look, we see this. All these newspapers, thousands, thousands of fucking articles, right? 11 times a day, the New York Times alone was hitting up stories on this. 11 times a day, right? It was fucking fear porn, right? It's all over. All right. So what I've done is I've condensed this into a nice little, oh, turn up the volume, please. All right, hold on 1 second. I just turned on the thing. Hello, hello. Hello? Hello? Hopefully that's good. Sorry. So what I've done is I used AI and I compiled a bunch of stuff in with it and I just put it in a way so I could like articulate, but it's not like the AI kind of crap that people write. It wasn't this, it was this. This is done more in a form of like you'll see. It's actually worth paying attention to because it's all the facts of what I'm telling you. I just put it in together so it can articulate easy. So it's called the Sputnik illusion, geopolitical preconceptional management, technical anomalies in the occult geometry of the Cold War space race, contemporary archival accounts of panic hysteria and staged celestial sovereignty. The dawn of the space age is conventionally framed as an authentic milestone of human scientific progress. However, temporary archival records reveal an event defined primarily by engineered social trauma, calculated media manipulation, and widespread psychological destabilization. On October 5th, 1957, the day following the alleged orbital insertion of Sputnik 1, the front page of the Baltimore News Post broadcasted the stark headline, Russ Moon Circling Earth, forcing its readers to confront the binary question, horror or progress? Underneath this sensationalized framing, the media quickly established a narrative that translated a primitive orbital metal ball into an intermediate existential nuclear threat. The psychological impact of the announcement was designed to invoke what historians and military strategists termed a Pearl Harbor atmosphere, right? A Pearl Harbor atmosphere. And we still put that shit on people today, right? That's 9/11. That's all the fucking fear porn, right? The next false flag that comes through, that's the same shit. That's how they program, right? Because you make bad decisions when you're scared, folks. That's what the Bible tells you. Don't fear. Don't be afraid. Anyways, Pearl Harbor atmospheres throughout the Western Hemisphere. The psychological shockwave was systematically amplified by mainstream news outlets. The New York Times published an unprecedented 279 articles mentioning the satellite between October 6th and October 31, 1957, averaging more than 11 articles per day. The relentless media barrage transformed a startled populace into a nation in shock. Prominent media commentators, science fiction writers, and political entrepreneurs seized upon the event to drive domestic narratives. On October 9th, 1957, Arthur C. Clarke publicly declared that the very day Sputnik began its orbit, the United States was instantly regulated to a second rate power. Editorial boards and regional columnists stroked the fires of public vulnerability with headlines warning that a nation must catch up with what we're dead. And now what I have here, what we're looking through here are basically the headlines in the papers. These are some of the dates in here. However, if you just go over to the Library of Congress and you search newspapers, right? And you just put in Sputnik or Sputnik Panic or Sputnik October 5th, 1957, it's going to populate you with a whole bunch of shit. And it's worth going and reading and seeing that the methods they used to freak people out back in the day are the exact same methods that they use today, right? I mean, it's the same shit, dude. The exact same shit, the exact same story. Anyways, so let's keep going, right? So, red moons over the U.S., uh, Berkner's cocktail party announced, blah, 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 blah. This moral panic was not merely a passive reaction to a foreign achievement, but highly orchestrated campaign that exploited existing domestic anxieties. Coming at the tail end of the aggressive McCarthyist communist witch hunts, and during an era when civil defense programs forced school children into duck and cover because you got to be scared, right? Because smart people make bad decisions even when they're scared. And they were way better educated back then. Right now, we're just a fucking crowd of idiots, right? So, like, there's really no movement. We're outgunned here, folks, these days. Duck and cover drills, which encourage drill while encouraging families to construct backyard fallout shelters. The sky itself was suddenly reconceptualized as a hostile territory. The physical evidence presented to the public was remarkably sparse. Indeed, the primary encounter that average citizen had with the satellite was through the radio sets. Ham radio operators such as Dick Obenhauser and his wife in Wisconsin turned their dials to low frequency bands, listening anxiously as the satellite emitted its mechanical beep, beep, beep every second. This repetitive sound broadcast over domestic radio, television news flashes, was explicitly presented by figures like NBC announcers as the sound which forevermore separates the old from the new, right? So it's like COVID, right? Like they're laying down the mental framework that this you're going into a whole new world. Kind of like they're doing with us now too, right? With the fucking Golden Dawn, like this is that moment, just in a different way. If you're looking at the parables, Um, all right. Optical and trajectory anomalies, the tumbling booster, and the illusion of descent. Pay attention, folks, because this is one of the first places where their story starts to fall apart remarkably easy. To reconstruct the events of October 1957, one must examine the profound physical and optical discrepancies that characterized the public sighting of Sputnik. Throughout the autumn of 1957, hundreds of thousands of citizens observers, amateur astronomers, and academic tracking networks reported seeing a bright star-like object gliding silently across the night sky. However, astronomical calculations and declassified engineering specifications revealed that the actual payload of the 58 centimeter, 23-inch polished aluminum sphere of Sputnik 1 was far too small to be visible to the naked eye at its orbital altitude, which was between the average of 134 miles and approximately 583 miles. The visual standards of a satellite is mathematically defined by its reflective surface area relative to its distance from the observer. A highly polished sphere of Sputnik's modest dimensions yields an optical magnitude of +6 to +8 under optimal twilight illumination, rendering it visually invisible to anyone without specialized telescopes or high-powered binoculars. Indeed, when a group of elite scientists at the International Geophysical Year reception in Washington, D.C. adjourned to the embassy rooftop to view the passing spacecraft, they were entirely unable to detect it with the naked eye. But don't worry, let's panic, people, right? Because the fucking sky is falling. What the global public actually observed in the night sky was not the heralded triumph of the Soviet microtechnology, but rather the massive discarded core booster stage of Block A of the R7 Semenoka rocket. The core stage was an immense piece of machinery, measuring between 26 and 30 meters in length. Because of its massive physical surface area, the tumbling rocket booster reflected sunlight with highly visible pulsating flashes, registering as the first magnetic celestial object easily tracked by civilian crowds in urban areas. The visual substitution was not an accidental byproduct of the orbital mechanics, but a deliberate act of theoretical presentation engineered by the chief designer of the Soviet space program, Sergei Kravlov. Krovlov explicitly ordered the installation of specialized reflective panels and angular corner reflectors on the R7 core booster stage, recognizing that the actual satellite would remain invisible to the stargazing public below. Korlov designed the mission to be highly visible and visibly dramatic, prioritizing psychological impact over purely scientific observation. Right? Like, they knew nobody was going to see the satellite, so they decided, hey, if we put a bunch of reflected shit on the actual engine as it's tumbling back down to Earth orbit, people are going to see that, and they're going to think that that's Sputnik, right? So, like, that's it. But it's just the fucking rocket, that piece that went up and fell down. Just people saw that for a second, and then that just it sold the illusion, right? It's kind of like at the end of what was that, like Swordfish or whatever, right? Um, where he lands the helicopter and you see it blow up and shit, but really he escaped. It's because what the eye sees, the brain believes, right? And that's what these people are doing. This is what I want to show you, is that they understand this psychology very, very well. They understand how to use this on an unwitting public, right? And in the fucking 50s, right? That's like shooting fish in a fucking barrel. Nobody's woke back then, really, right? Like, nobody has a clue what's going on. Space doesn't exist. This is all new. So, like, the fear and the anxiety that they're driving into the population, right? No wonder they start making bad decisions, right? No wonder. Anyways, let's keep going. I don't want to derail myself. Um, Recognizing that the actual satellite would remain invisible to the stargazing public below, Kavlov designed a mission to be highly visible and visibly dramatic prioritizing psychological impact over purely scientific observation. The global population was thus subjected to a classic sleight of hand, where they were witnessing a sophisticated space dwelling traveling companion. The physical illusion is further compounded by the trajectory of the anomalies observed during the launch phase. James Org's compiled history of launch sites witness indicate that the first orbital blastoff presented an unexpected, terrifying, counterintuitive sight to observers at the Tiderum range. Accustomed to traditional vertical ballistic missile tests, which rose steeply and faded directly into the upper atmosphere, the observers watched with mounting horror as the Sputnik rocket climbed higher and higher, then took a sharp downward turn toward the horizon. Trajectory specialists were forced to console their distraught, weeping colleagues, explaining that the apparent descent was an illusion of perspective. Yeah, that parabolic arch where something goes up and then it comes down, it's just an illusion, right? Don't pay attention to what your eyes see, right? We're going to fucking space, man. Like there's endless possibilities in space. You're just a little fucking accidental speck, dude. You're just like your time and time mixed with chemical reactions and evolution, and that slowly got you to where you are, dude. But there ain't shit special about you because you're a speck on a speck in the middle of vastness, right? Like that's where we're going in the future. They're taking us. We're gonna have DARPA come into the picture and take us into this lovely technocratic future that we find ourselves in today. All right. To achieve orbit efficiently, the rocket had to transition quickly to the horizontal flight path once it cleared the dense layer of atmospheres. The impression that the vehicle was falling back to Earth was a product of the sun's curvature and the growing distance, yet it highlights a foundational theme. Sputnik's entire celestial presence was defined by optical and perspective illusions designed to trick the human brain, right? So basically, the argument is that it wasn't a bug, it was a feature, right? It's designed that way. Here's all the physical dimensions of everything. I mean, if anyone cares, I'll put this out on like X, maybe publish it under like articles or some shit. If you guys want to look at this thing that I put together, you're more than welcome to. But anyways, physical contradictions, the spatial power disproportion, and ionospheric anomalies. Yeah, let's get into the power, baby. Let's get into the power. A rigorous analysis of Sputnik 1 payload reveals a series of physical contradictions and technical anomalies that challenge the standard historical narrative of the mission. The spacecraft is artificially documented as a 184-pound sphere containing a dual frequency radio transmitter, the D200 unit, an internal nitrogen pressurized system maintained at 1.3 atmospheres of pressure, a ventilation fan, and several barometric and thermal switches. The primary physical contradiction resides in the extreme disproportion between the satellite's reported battery mass, its power consumption, and its operational lifespan. To power the 1-watt vacuum tube based D200 transmitter and the internal thermal regulatory fan, the satellite was packed with 3 massive silver zinc chemical batteries. These 3 batteries, developed under the direction of Nikolai S. Loredenko, weighed a combined 51 kilograms, constituting over 60% of the satellite's entire 83.6 mass. This left a mere 32.6 kilograms to account for the double-shelled aluminum, magnesium, titanium alloy hull, the internal structural framework, the complex ventilation ducting, the thermal switches, the remote arming switch, and the 4 massive spring-loaded whip antennas, which extended up to 2.9 meters in length. Remember that in the beginning, the fucking big crackhead antennas? This right here, right? So this is it. This is Sputnik Open, right? That's the battery, supposedly, right? They took all the extra shit out, but it's supposed to fit basically, like here on the outer ends, right? Like this is Sputnik, okay? And again, It's the size of a beach ball, dude. It's not even 2 feet in diameter, dude. It's 22 inches, right? Not that big. But I guess when you're with space and we're going on make believe, everything's possible. So let's continue right along. All right. The silver zinc batteries were normally rated to operate for approximately 2 weeks under vacuum conditions. Yet, despite the continuous power drain, the D200 vacuum tubes, and the constant cycle of the internal cooling fan, the transmitters maintained a robust, interrupted broadcast for exactly 22 days. The D200 transmitter itself was comprised of two independent radio modules situated inside a singular housing surrounded by the octagonal battery framework, right, which we just looked at right here. That, right, this is the battery framework right here. Actually, here, in case somebody wants more time to look at that, but all right. Framework, where are we at today? The power output was the power output was rated at exactly 1 watt per module. However, the transmitter had no radio frequencies RF carrier modulation. It relied on simple interrupted carrier wave transmissions. The alternating key on, key off cycles were managed by an oscillating relay system termed the manipulator. And that right there is this thing right here. I showed you that in the beginning. Something would hold this, and it would pull it out, and it would slide this thing back down. So anytime this thing went down, um, no connection. You pull it up, you get the connection, right? So you just keep doing that, right? That's what's going on, and every time that goes, you get the beep. Um, Transmission. The alternating key on, key off cycles were managed by an oscillating relay system thing, the manipulator. The manipulator utilized two highly sensitive magnetic latching twin coil relays. The Russian made PNC4 model PC4.520.350 to alternatively switch off the screen supply voltages to the transmission module's output pinode tubes. Right? The duty cycle of this oscillation was modified by adjusting the charging profile capacitors in a symmetrical mirror circuit, while the basic on-off key was designed to communicate internal temperature and pressure changes by alternating the pulse length from 0.3 to 0.4 seconds. The entire operating paradigm was automated and lacked any capacity for ground station commanding or interactive control. So basically, once that shit launched and like started, it was on its own. Nobody could fuck with it. There was no relay, right? This is all new too, right? All right. Beyond the mass energy discrepancy, the launch itself was shrouded in absolute secrecy, leaving a total void of primarily empirical verification. The satellite was launched from Site 1/5 at a highly classified test range near Turatem in Kazakh Soviet Republic to mislead Western intelligence. The Soviet state of apparatus purposefully fabricated the geographic origin of the launch, naming the site the Balknor Cosmodrome. After a small geographic origin of the launch, or after a small mining town located more than 200 miles to the northeast. No photographs, motion pictures, or physical descriptions of the satellite or its launch vehicle were released to the global public for 5 days following the event. There's nothing suspicious about that either, right? I mean, happens all the time. You'd probably want to wait 5 days too, right? The world was forced to accept it, the existing of an orbiting space vehicle based entirely on a single stream of evidence, the repeating arithmetic software, radio beeps broadcasting 20 millihertz and 40 millihertz. This reliance on shortwave radio telemetry introduces the most significant scientific anomaly of the Sputnik mission. Now, pay attention here, folks, because this is real science, right? That's what we're all about, NASA science, right? Uh, the reliance on short-wave radio telemetry introduces the most significant science anomaly of the Sputnik mission. During its active phase, the 20 millihertz signal exhibited propagation characteristics that defied the established physics of the ionosphere. According to prevailing atmospheric models, high-frequency signals in the decameter band should have been entirely reflected back into our space by the dense plasma of the F layer rather than penetrating downward to reach receivers on the Earth's surface. They're telling you that the wave should have fucking bounced off the ionosphere, so it shouldn't have made it back. Anyways, let's keep going. Um, Even more anomalous was the continuous reception of the signal at distances exceeding 10,000 to 16,000 kilometers. From the calculated position of the satellite, ground stations and amateur radio operators routinely recorded the characteristic beep, beep, beep when the satellite was positioned at the exact antipodal point on the opposed side of the globe. The antipodal effect, a sudden rise in signal strength when a transmitter is located at a polar opposite coordinate of the receiver, is a classic signature of terrestrial sky wave propagation. The signal behavior strongly suggests that the transmission source was in immediately coupled with the Earth's surface and the lower atmosphere. These propagation anomalies raise the profound technical possibility that the signals were not originating from a space dwelling platform, but were instead being generated by terrestrial shortwave relay networks, sounding rockets, or high altitude atmospheric balloons. Such technologies were widely deployed during the International Geophysical Year and were fully capable of mimicking the Doppler shift key-on, key-off telemetry of the D200 transmitter, right? So they're telling you right there that what you're hearing, like basically the shit that you thought was coming from the sky wasn't going to get to you because it would have fucking bounced off the atmosphere, right? Plus the distance to get that to you was too great for the short wave that it was. But on top of that, they're explaining to you how it was just shipped through relay stations. Because remember, the only thing that anyone had in the beginning outside of all the scare porn was that beep, right? That social connector to the trauma. Everybody heard the beep. The beep's coming around. The beep's coming around. The beep's coming around. Be scared, right? All right. This is all the distance travel, things like that. We don't need to go into any of this right now. The staged geopolitical threat, the circular space race, and the state restructuring. This is where we start getting into the motives, right? This is where you can start seeing how big government benefited like this, right? Now you're going to get to see the Patriot Act of its time, right? You're going to see NASA come in. You're going to see DARPA come in. You're going to see the National Security Education Department come in because, now we got to be taught a certain way too, right? Like you see the deep state really just start digging its claws in. Here we go. When stripped of its scientific romanticism, the Sputnik crisis revealed itself as a highly coordinated geopolitical psychological operation. Psyop! That served the structural interest of the ruling elites in both the Soviet Union and the United States. The historical record indicates that the space race did not form a spontaneous scientific rivalry, but was catalyzed by speculative media reports that constructed a circular, self-reinforcing argument. Beginning in 1954, a series of unverified state-sanctioned articles regarding satellite development began appearing in Soviet publications. These articles were systematically translated and highlighted by major American newspapers like the Washington Post and the New York Times, eventually catching the attention of the Central Intelligence Agency. In 1955, the Eisenhower administration reacted to these speculative reports by publicly announcing its intention to launch a scientific satellite during the upcoming International Geophysical Year. Seizing upon the official American declaration, Sergei Korolev immediately drafted a letter to the Soviet Politburo on August 5, 1955. He attached clippings from the American press as proof that the United States was moving to monopolize space using this scaled-down, simplified satellite program designated Object PS. Circular media feedback loop, speculate articles published in Soviet state media, versus the U.S. press amplifies and sensationalizes and lets you know the sky is falling, right? And then the government then reacts to the press, right? Announcing that, oh, like, we're fucking going to space too. Yeah, it ain't just them. We can do that shit too. We're gonna bring it, right? And then Russia uses that announcement to say, see, now they're doing it too, so we can't stop. We need more money. We got to build this up. Because really, they weren't trying to fucking get into space. Everybody wanted to start building their fucking rockets and start really building the military industrial complex, right? Like that's where they wanted it to take off. But stay with me. The orchestrated crisis provided the perfect catalyst for the rapid top-down reorganization of the Western military-industrial educational complex. The resulting public hysteria forced hands of policymakers, leading directly to the creation of massive centralized state institutions designed to capture and direct public funds into high-technology defense programs. Within less than a year, the Sputnik launch the United States government established. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration, that's the NASSholes. The Advanced Research and Projection Agency, that's ARPA, which then turned to DARPA, and the National Defense Educational Act, which is a sweeping educational reform that poured billions of federal money into controlling how Americans got educated, what you learned, what was important, what was a national security risk, right? Once that national security risk starts seeping into things, it gets a little murky. The Sputnik crisis also provided the perfect cover for a massive, unprecedented expansion of the nuclear arms race. Although President Eisenhower quietly attempted to downplay the technological significance of the satellite, public and political pressure forced him to accelerate the national's intercontinental ballistic missile (ICBM) program. The National Security Advisors consistently and deliberately overestimated the Soviet Union's missile strength, constructing the myth that the missile gap to justify astronomical defense budgets. The funding for projects like Solid Fuel, Minuteman missile program instantly ballooned, with congressional appropriations for the Minuteman raising from 50 million to 140 million almost overnight, right? And these are like 1950s numbers, right? So like, dude, $140 million. I bet you if we translate, that's got to be a couple billion, dude. And those dollars in those days, right? And that's when a fucking dollar actually like bought shit too, right? So look at the budget and where it started to balloon and the infrastructure through the 40s and up through the 50s, almost overnight. By manufacturing a collective trauma through projection of the red moon hanging over the American homeland, the state successfully locked humanity into a permanent, highly lucrative uh, uh, paradigm, right, of technological progression. Like that starts where we get to today, right? That's the era. That's the catalyst that gets you to the point of fucking AI and all this other tenocracy. Warner von Braun and the elite scripting of outer space, right? Because we got to have a place to look out to because you got to sell them on bullshit. And you can sell them on any bullshit when it's out there because what the fuck do they know? It's out there. The deep state coordinated this geopolitical theater is further illustrated by the career and literary output of Warner von Braun, the chief architect of the American space program. Yeah, the fucking science fiction writer. A former SS major who oversaw the manufacturing of V 2 ballistic missiles at the brutal Middleton Works forced labor factory during World War II. Von Braun was brought to the United States under Project Paperclip, installed at the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. Von Braun led the American Ballistic Missiles Agency's rocket development team. Prior to the Sputnik launch, von Braun had meticulously worked out the exact engineering specifications for launching a satellite into orbit under Project Orbiter. Despite having an operational rocket, the RS-29, in storage ready to deploy, von Braun was repeatedly denied the political authorization to launch. The Eisenhower administration explicitly prioritized the Navy's all-American Project Vanguard, a program that Van Braun knew had virtually no chance of succeeding in the short term. This systematic stalling of the American capability ensured that the Soviet Union would achieve its psychological victory first, providing the necessary shock required to mobilize the massive institutional restructuring in 1958, which is what everything was about. All right? So 1948, 1949, Werner von Braun writes Project Mars. It's a novel. It outlines the Martian colony, right? Their leader is the Elon, kind of like the Elon Musk, right? Bicameral Parliament Cabinet, right? 1971 is when Elon Musk is born, right? And he's named Elon, obviously, by his parents. 2002, this is where we get SpaceX and the rest of the shenanigans. Let's keep going. Von Braun's involvement in the scripting of space exploration extends beyond physical engineering into the realm of long-range predictive modeling. Between 1948 and 1949, while stationed at Fort Bliss, New Mexico, von Braun penned a highly detailed science fiction manuscript titled Project Mars, A Technical Tale. While the technical appendix of this work was published in German in 1952 as Das Marsprojekt, the narrative portion of the novel remained entirely unpublished and hidden from the public until 2006. Yeah, so those only into the know really kind of looked into it, right? That German engineering. In this speculative text set in the 1980s, von Braun describes a human expedition to Mars where they discover a highly advanced, benevolent Martian civilization living in a vast underground cities. According to the narrative, the Martian society is governed by a political structure led by a single supreme leader. This leader, elected by the universal suffrage for a 5-year term. This official this officially designated by the title the Elon. So that's the title, the Elon. The leader rules alongside a cabinet and a bicameral parliament, with the upper house restricted to a membership of 60 individuals appointed for life by the Elon. The detail represents an extraordinary, highly anomalous convergence. Decades after the book was written, a real world figure named Elon Musk would arise to dominate the global aerospace industry, explicitly stating that his life's ultimate mission is the colonization of Mars. Although Musk's father, Errol, later claimed that von Braun's writings had inspired the naming of his son, the chronological publication records render this explanation highly improbable, as Elon Musk was born in 1971, 35 years before the narrative manuscript containing the Elon character was first published in 2006. This correspondence suggests that the entire trajectory of the space exploration, from the engineering panic of Sputnik to the modern push for the Red Planet, is governed by a long-range, elite-level script that utilizes precise, predictive, nominal designations. The occult geometry of 22 and 1440, Maya, Gadam, and the invertive Shahara. Behind the physical this is going to lay you back kind of in the mystery school kind of things, right? So you're going to understand more on how they view the world and how they're setting up, because to them this is like a magic, right? And it's actually a little bit more than that. It's technomancy. It's the merger of like sigil magic with technology, right? And that's what you're saying. Like Elon's all about that, Grok, Neuralink, shit like that. That's not a secret. That's not speculative, right? It is what the fuck it is. All right, let's go on. Oh, give me 1 second. I'm gonna get some water from right here. Sorry about that. It just gets very thirsty doing all this reading. Is anybody in here, by the way? I have no idea. I can't see the chat if anyone's talking. I don't know what's going on, but hopefully you guys are enjoying this. Behind the physical material, well, let's just start. The occult geometry of 22 and 1440, Maya, Gadam, and the inverted Shashara. Behind the physical materialist theater of the Cold War space race lies a profound layer of assortic geometry and numerical alignment, suggesting that Sputnik narrative was constructed as a ritual of mass perceptual control. To understand this dimension, one must analyze the two primary numbers that define the physical and temporal parameters of Sputnik. One, the number 22 and the number 1440. In the ancient systems of the Chaldeans, the Pythagoreans, and the Hermetic numerology, the number 32 is designated as a master number. 11, 32, or 22, 32, or 33. Those are the master numbers. 11, 22, 33. Master numbers. Um, where are we at? And the number 1440 is blah 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 blah, designated master number of immense power representing structure and material manifestation. 2 plus 2 is 4. However, in its compound historic expression, 22 is explicitly tied to the vibration of Maya, or illusion. It represents the experience of living in a dream world, a state where life has little to no touch with actual reality. In Shiro's classic work on compound numbers, 22 is symbolized by a good man's blinded by the folly of others, with a knapsack on his back full of arrows, offering no defense against a ferocious tiger. It is classified as a highly negative warning numbered of illusion, delusion, and false paths. It describes the dreamer of dreams who awakens only when surrounded by unforeseen dangers. The vibrational frequency of the illusion was physically and temporally stamped over the very body, the 58 centimeters, and the active telemet broadcast for 22 days before its batteries were reportedly exhausted. By structuring the physical dimensions and the active lifespan of the vehicle around the master number of Maya, the architects of the event encoded the true nature of the project directory, right? Because this is all symbolic magic to them. They believe that if they take the the symbolic magic and that they do something physical with it, that's what manifests, right? So that it takes it from the ether, the thought, the conception, and binds it with reality, and that's what manifests it, that's what brings it forth. Complementing the spatial temporal stamp of the number 22, the temporal duration of the satellite's silent journey, Sputnik 1 completed exactly 1,440 orbits around the Earth before decaying and burning up in the atmosphere on January 4th, 1958. The number 1440 is a sacred temporal constant consisting of the precise number of minutes in a single 24-hour day. 24 hours times 60 minutes equals 1,440. By completing exactly 1440 orbits, the flight path of the satellite traced a perfect temporal anchoring of the vehicle into the syncilic matrix of the terrestrial time. Uh, that's I know this sounds odd, but just keep this in the back of your head for another time that we talk. That right there is what is happening in Back to the Future. By the way, that's the concept they're getting across to you. But and that's why Back to the Future and 9/11 and that shit fucking align. But we'll get into that at another time. It's fucking crazy. Blah 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 blah. Um, when examined through the lens of Hebrew gematria and assortic theology, the number 1440 reveals deep, dark occurrence and meaning, desolation and the cutting off of holiness. In biblical Hebrew, the Strong's Concordance identifier H1440 designates the proper name of Gidom, derived from the root gada, meaning to cut down, to hew off, or desolation. Gidom is the geographical marker where the uh, pursuing force of Israel cut down and exterminated the remaining force of the tribe of Benjamin. The number 1440 thus acts as a silent witness to a national judgment, representing the cutting off of the old spiritual world and the initiation of a cold materialistic paradigm into the technological desolation. The geometry of sealed consciousness. The base number of 144 is a byproduct of cosmic order, 12 by 12 squared, right? Like that's how you get to your 144. If you're in the mystery schools, you're already there. Representing the structure of the divine government. In biblical books of Revelation, the number of the sealed servant of God is 144,000, representing those who have activated a divine spark within. In Eastern esoteric uh, physiology, the subtle body contains exactly 72,000 energy channels, nadis, on each side of the body, yielding a total of 144,000 channels that converge at the Shashahara or the crown chakra. The activation of the Shashahara, the crown chakra, located at the highest point of the human cranium, is traditionally represented as a lotus possessing 1,000 petals. Oh shit, hold on. Are you okay? Good though? All right, sorry about that. Sorry about that. All right, I'm back. Okay, where was I? The activation of the Shashahara. The crown chakra, located at the highest point of the human cranium, is traditionally represented as a lotus possessing 1,000 petals. In esoteric yoga, when the 144 channel of the lower six chakras, including the 96 channels of the Anjan, the third eye chakra, are fully integrated and multiplied by the 1,000 petals of the Shashahara, the system achieves the perfect resonance of 144,000 vibrations of divine creation. The mathematical formula of this subtle geometry is defined as the total petals of the lower five centers, 48 petals, right? Peak frontal thing, 96 petals, integrated inner shock, 144 petals, subtotal, there's all your math for you, right? By utilizing the vehicle that completed exactly 1,440 orbits to capture the collective imagination of the human race, the orchestration of the space race executed a massive planetary scale inverted ritual. They hijacked the sacred geometry of the 144,000 activated channels of higher spiritual consciousness, channeling the raw psychic energy downward into a materialist, state controlled technological myth. The collective gaze of humanity was directed away from the inner heavens towards the physical weaponized sky, right? So it was no more. Yeah, all's good. Sorry. It was a false alarm. Thank you for checking. So, right, like I was telling you earlier, this is when it deviates from, whether you're religious or not, God, internal spiritualization, whatever, then it just became out there because they can sell you on anything out there because it doesn't exist, right? It's whatever they make it up to be. And then they just indoctrinate you with it in that education system that they, uh, built up with it. You see where we're going with all this? All right. Um, Jack Parson and the esoteric genesis of modern aerospace, right? Like everybody that we picked for our fucking space program, they were all occultists, right? It was all based on sigils and magic and shit, right? Like they were drawing sigils on the rocket. The structural integrity of the space program with esoteric forces is farther illuminated by the foundation history of the very first institutions that arose to combat the Sputnik crisis. The primary architecture of the American rocket propulsion was not developed by sterile materialist academics, but by Marvel Whiteside Jack Parson, a brilliant chemist, rocket pioneer, and devoted occultist. Parson was a co founder of the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory Rocket Research Group, GAUKIT, which eventually evolved directly into NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the JPL, and he founded the Aerojet Engineering Corporation to commercialize rocket technology. Mind you, this guy's a fucking book writer, right? And outside of that, he was the advisor on Hans Fritz, the what was it, like the Girl to the Moon or whatever, right? That had the first rocket launch, but it was in media, and it was like probably 10 years before any of this shit happened. Where was I? Rocket Lab, sorry. By day, Parson pioneered as the development of castable composite solid rocket propellants, such as the asphalt-based Galsit 53, which laid the chemical foundations for the solid rocket boosters used in modern military missiles and space exploration. By night, however, Parsons lived a radical double life. He was a high-ranking member of Aleister Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis and served as the leader of Agape Lodge in Pasadena, California. Parsons saw no contradiction between rocket science and ceremonial magic. Indeed, he viewed both as unified methods of breaking through the physical and psychological limitations of the material world. Before rocket tests, Parsons was known to recite Crowley's Hymn to Pam, invoking ancient pagan forces to guide his empirical breakthroughs. Okay, so by day, he's mild manner scientist. By night, he's fucking occult degenerate. And but all time fraud. An occultist. In 1946, alongside future Scientologist founder L. Ron Hubbard, isn't it funny that he showed up here, right? Scientology. Parsons conducted a series of intense secret rituals in the Mojave Desert known as Babylonian working. Utilizing Enochian magic and sexual ritual, Parsons sought to summon and manifest the individual incarnation of the Tehimite goddess Babylon, the Scarlet Woman, onto the Earth. His objective was to break open a dimensional gateway, initiating a new aeon of human evolution by liberating humanity from the bounds of traditional Christian morality and scientific orthodoxy. Right? They wanted to basically do what CERN's doing now. They wanted to open portals and they wanted to connect and break through the veil. That's really all that's saying. During these rituals, Parson reported numerous paranormal manifestations in his house, including dismembered bodies, dismembered voices, localized alchemical shifts in weather, and poltergeist activities. At the culminations of the working, an unemployed illustrator and former Navy wave named Major Cameron arrived at the house. Parson recognized her as the elemental woman and physical manifestation of the goddess Babylon. Shortly after, Cameron reported witnessing a highly anomalous UFO sighting, which Parson recorded in his magical diaries as the final materialization of the Scarlet Woman. Although Parson died in a mysterious, violent laboratory explosion in Pasadena in 1952 at the age of 37, the esoteric fire he lit was never extinguished. The technologies he pioneered were quietly absorbed and institutionalized by the state defense apparatus. When the artificial crisis of the Sputnik was unleashed on the public in 1957, the newly formed NASA and JPL utilized the solid fuel propulsion systems and structure framework developed by Parson to launch the nation in the space race. The entire material infrastructure of the space age was built upon a foundation of OTO ritualism, proving that the conquest of the physical space was always meant to serve as an outer esoteric temple for the inner esoteric agenda of planetary displacement. And that's what they do with all of the fucking uh, launches, right? Like Challenger, uh, uh, Apollo, Challenger, what was the other one? All three of those, right? They all take place at uh, essentially the equinox, right? The corner, what do they call it? Corner time, corner point, right? But it's at the point where the first new light of spring hits. That's why even though they're all these years apart, they're only off by a couple days in their respective years because they were all falling on the same event on the calendar. And event one took 19 years after, or event two took place 19 years after event one because it created a metonic cycle. And a metonic cycle means that if you look up at the sky, right, the way everything is right now, right, the planets where they are, whatever, right, it would take 19 years for everything to move through its cycle to get exactly back to the way it was in this moment. Okay, 19 years is it's basically what it takes to get a cosmic reset. Does that make sense? So that's why it doesn't matter. Even Artemis, it launched right in the same thing, and then they attach the mythology to it. But again, that's going to be a whole separate thing. I want to stay focused on Sputnik here, so I can easily get carried off. Um, Conclusion: the celestial mirror of the materialist captivity. The critical synthesis of contemporary media accounts, technical specifications, and esoteric indicators reveal that Sputnik 1 was not a purely scientific milestone, but rather a masterpiece of perceptual ritualism. By manipulating a startled public through the sensational projection of a flashing, tumbling rocket booster, the state apparatus effectively manufactured a crisis that justified the rapid centralization of the military industrial power. The geopolitical theater was encoded with precise mathematics, numerical, and historical alignments. The alignment of the satellite's parameters with the number 22, the compound frequency of Mayan illusion, and the completion of exactly 1,440 orbits uh, point towards a highly coordinated campaign of mass psychological captivity, right? And we see these numbers show up like all the time, right? Um, but that's it. And then here's a bunch of shit that was put in with sightings and stuff. So you know, if people want to know exactly where some of these things came from, but anyways, so that's it. So Sputnik was bullshit. Sputnik was what was used to set off the mass sphere. Sputnik was what was used to launch NASA and DARPA or ARPA, which later turned to DARPA, and the National Security Education and kicked off the military industrial apparatus. That is it. That was the 9/11, and it was an artificial fucking boogeyman from the beginning. Hopefully you like this and I made like sense and I was coherent and that this didn't seem too far off for you. I mean, I really did my best to just like keep all this shit like rooted and I didn't want to get too crazy into the esoteric side of things, but they are connected. You can't separate them. It's just hard sometimes to explain concepts like these to people who might not be as familiar with it, and it's nothing against people like that, that's just they're not used to that information yet, like they've never really heard it, it takes a while before you get used to something or you understand. Um, yeah, but that's it. So hopefully you enjoyed this. I appreciate y'all hanging out with me and listening. Yeah, that's it, man. I appreciate you guys. Have a good day.